Pope Francis' death, a step toward prophecy fulfillment? Find out what happens next. Welcome to Between Legends and Reality, the channel where we explore the deepest mysteries and stories that have marked our history. Today we will talk about an event that has shaken the entire world, the death of Pope Francis. His passing is not just a farewell, but a historical turning point that could mark the beginning of a new phase for the Church and for all humanity. The death of Pope Francis marked the end of an era, but it also rekindled interest in the many prophecies that speak of the fate of the Church and the world. The figure of Pope Francis has been surrounded by an aura of mystery since the beginning, not only because of his origins, but also because of the way in which he revolutionized the Catholic Church. His death has raised more questions than we could have imagined, fueling the debate about what happens next, especially in light of the prophecies that seem to foretell events of historic significance. To fully understand the significance of this death, it is necessary to return to the life of Pope Francis and reflect on his pontificate and how his actions have been interpreted in the context of the prophecies. Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio on December 17, 1936 in Buenos Aires, was the first non-European pope in over 1,300 years, marking a historic transition in the Church. The son of Italian emigrants, he spent his childhood and youth in Argentina, developing a strong social conscience, which led him to join the Jesuits. His spiritual growth was marked not only by theological learning, but by a deep connection with the daily difficulties of people, especially the poor. During his years as bishop and archbishop, Francis stood out for his social activism, always close to the peripheries of society, especially during the Argentine dictatorship of the 1970s, when the Church faced great challenges related to the desaparecidos. Despite some criticism of his alleged inaction, his vision of the Church led him to focus on the fight for human rights, social justice, and the defense of the most vulnerable. In 2013, at the death of Pope Benedict XVI and the beginning of a pontificate that would change the Church, Francis chose the name Saint Francis of Assisi, a symbol of poverty, humility, and love for others. This act was a clear sign of his intention to restore the Church to its original mission, that of being at the service of the people, with particular attention to the poor, the marginalized, and those living on the margins of society. He chose a sober life, rejecting the pomp and opulence typical of the papal residence, to live in Casa Santa Marta, far from the aristocratic habits of the Vatican. From the very beginning, Francis spoke of an outgoing Church, which does not close in on itself but is close to everyone, especially those most in need. His vision and actions have not gone unnoticed. Pope Francis has dared to speak on controversial issues, such as climate change, globalization, social inequality, and the dignity of migrants. His words on the globalization of indifference have hit hard the global economic system, which, according to him, has put the lives of the weakest in the background. His encyclical Laudato Si', which addresses the theme of ecology and integral ecology, called on all humanity to care for our planet as a common home. Francis also had the courage to speak about war, violence, and peace, often challenging world powers. A pope who was not afraid to speak directly to political leaders, condemning the wars, rearmament, and conflicts that tear the world apart. But what are the implications of his death for the future of the Church and the world? Prophecies have always played a central role in understanding religious and world events. One of the most fascinating prophecies related to the Catholic Church is that of Saint Malachy, who in the 12th century, according to some, drew up a list of 112 popes, cryptically describing each pope from then until the end of time. The last pope, according to Malachy, would be Petrus Romanus, a Roman pope who would rule the Church during a time of terrible tribulation, a time when the Church would face great persecution before the end of the world. Many believe that Pope Francis may be the last pope on this list, the last pontiff, whose death could mark the beginning of the purification of the Church, a purification that, according to some interpretations, would precede the arrival of a new world order. Nostradamus' prophecies seem to reinforce this vision of a world going through times of tribulation. Nostradamus, one of the most famous soothsayers in history, often spoke of global events and cataclysms in his quatrains, and some of his predictions seem to align with the idea of a black pope and a great world catastrophe. According to some scholars, Nostradamus predicted a pope who would preside during a time of war and turmoil, and that his death would be a sign of a dramatic change in the history of the Church. In a certain sense, the death of Pope Francis could represent the fulfillment of this prophecy, as a prelude to an epochal change that will involve the Church, politics, and the destiny of humanity. No less important is the Third Secret of Fatima, which has fascinated millions of people around the world. This secret, which was partially revealed in 2000, prophesied a great tribulation for the Church, in which the Pope would be martyred. The figure of Francis has often been associated with the prophecy of a suffering pope, who would face grave difficulties before being called to meet God. Although the death of Pope Francis was not a martyrdom in the literal sense of the term, his life and pontificate were marked by persecution, criticism and attacks by those who did not share his vision of a modern and inclusive church. His death could, therefore, be seen as a sign that the spiritual martyrdom prophesied by Fatima is taking shape, but in a different way than many had imagined. The visions of Padre Pio and the revelations of Saint Faustina Kowalska are another piece of this complex mosaic. Padre Pio, known for his stigmata and his prophecies, spoke of a church purified through pain, a pain that would precede a spiritual rebirth. Her visions of a world at war and in danger were echoed in her prayers for the salvation of humanity. Saint Faustina, for her part, received the gift of visions of divine mercy, a message that called the world to reckon with sin and the need for redemption. His prophecy of a great purification that would precede the return of Christ is reflected in the difficulties the Church and humanity are facing today. Finally, the death of Pope Francis inevitably raises questions about who will be the next pope and what direction the Catholic Church will take. With the conclave now upon us, everyone is wondering whether the new pope will continue in Francis's footsteps, with a church that is open, welcoming, and committed to social justice, or whether there will be a return to tradition, with a more conservative pope who will re-emphasize the traditional doctrine and practices of the pre-Vatican II Church. We are facing a time of great change, and as Pope Francis has always said, history continues. His death could be the beginning of a new phase for the Church, one that could lead to a spiritual rebirth or a profound purification. Future developments, as well as the choices of the next pope, will be crucial to the fate of the Catholic Church and its mission in the world. Only time will tell if the prophecies of Saint Malachy, Nostradamus, Fatima, and other revelations will come true. What is certain is that the death of Pope Francis, however sad, is not the end of a journey, but a passage. A passage that opens the doors to the future. If this video has made you think about the future of the Church and the prophecies surrounding the death of Pope Francis, don't miss the next updates. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and stay with us to discover together what the future holds for us. The challenges are enormous, but together we can face them with faith and hope.